Hello and welcome to my storybook cottage, and thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking about transitions, which are incredibly important when you're writing fiction, but are actually very hard to pull off. Transitions are hard enough for real people in real life, like moving house, but when you're trying to move your narrative from one place to another or from one time to another, and if you're trying to make the transition not too abrupt, but at the same time not take too long, it's really hard. And when I'm talking about a transition being too abrupt, I mean like the drop off the edge of a cliff, for instance, at a lookout near my place. If you have a narrative where one sentence you're at a house and then the next sentence you're on an ocean liner, it's just too jarring. It's like this, jumping off the edge of this. Another example is if you're writing this lovely, gentle, old-fashioned story, like this lovely, gentle, old-fashioned street, which is also near my place and which is full of cosy, historic houses, and then suddenly crash. You've got this house, which is like throwing a techno-thriller scene into your laid-back domestic rom-com. That's what I mean when I talk about an abrupt transition. What I really want to achieve when I'm executing a transition is something as smooth as the recent work that's been done at a place called Darwin's Walk, not far from here in Wentworth Falls. As you can see, Darwin's Walk starts in a classic English-style park, very tidy and full of lawns and European deciduous trees and sports grounds and structures. Then we get to the entrance of the new Grand Clifftop Walk, which Darwin's Walk is a part of. And that's pretty impressive, very man-made. And then as we enter the bush, there's a definite sense of transition. We're not flung headlong into the wild, but are led along paved paths and stairs and boardwalks and past stone walls that meld the built or planned environment with the wilderness. You can see how in this spot the natural creek bank has been augmented by stonework and the transition is fairly smooth. Then the paths slowly become rougher and finally the transition has been made from the park to the national park. Incidentally, Darwin's Walk is named after Charles Darwin, the iconic naturalist who visited the Blue Mountains and walked along Jamison Creek in 1836. So when you visit Darwin's Walk, you're pretty much following in his footsteps. When you're talking about transitions, one of the hardest to do is a time transition. Sometimes you can break up the text with a space or a little star, and you can go from one period of time in the first part of the text to the next period of time in the second part of the text. But sometimes you have to do it within the text, and then you can use transitional phrases like the next day or as the weeks went by, or something like that. But it's much trickier than it sounds, and getting the pacing right is really difficult. One of the nice things about living in the Blue Mountains is that in late summer and early autumn, you'll see a red leaf here or an orange leaf there, and you'll suddenly realise that summer is transitioning to autumn. It's kind of like foreshadowing, which is another device you can use in storytelling. Autumn has been used throughout history to symbolise the passing of time. Autumn years is a phrase often used to convey the period before wintry old age. Sometimes I just wish that I could achieve this kind of time transition in my work, transition that's really paced well and smooth and eventually climaxes in the most spectacular show that's almost as vivid and colourful as fireworks. That would be my dream fiction story. Another transition that happens in stories is the transition that happens to characters inside the stories. For instance, in Pagan's Crusade, my main character, Pagan, changes from being this person who doesn't have or care about anyone to someone who has a place in the world. And in Saving Thanehaven, the main character, Noble, goes from just killing monsters in his computer game that he lives in to realising that there's a great big world out there and stepping outside the computer game. The Gentleman's Garden, the main character, Dorothea, goes from being this provincial, snobby person in a bad marriage to someone who's far more tolerant and who is in love. And then in The Inquisitor, Brother Bernard he changes from being this very self-contained persecutor of heretics to someone who understands and sympathises with heresy. So, yeah, it's a common way to deal with characters, to make them change. And in the Blue Mountains, there are lots of buildings that have they've transformed in the same way. They've changed from one thing to the other, and it's really obvious. This old house in Lura, for instance, has become a cafe. There's a church in Katoomba that's been turned into a restaurant. And here's another former church in Lura, which has become a chocolate shop called Josophans. Josophans makes the most fantastic award-winning chocolates in this actual building. They also sell ice cream. Inside you can see church architectural details like this roof and the stage on which the altar must have been, and this very churchy looking door. I must admit though, it is hard to pay attention to the architectural details when the place is full of amazing chocolate. I suppose it's fitting that an old church is a chocolate shop, since it's hard not to worship at the altar of chocolate. The kind of things Josophans can create out of chocolate are pretty amazing too, like skulls and shoes and a giant snowman, and even this amazing bustier, all chocolate. No wonder they say magic happens here. Another high quality award-winning business that's transformed a local building is the Mountain Culture Beer Company. It opened a few years ago in Katoomba in a building that was, between 1895 and 1948, the home of various Mountains newspapers. In the barn-like rear of the building, you can see where the printing presses used to be. Now this same big open plan area houses beer vats and other equipment, as well as the service area. Mountain Culture prides itself on brewing limited release ales and lagers, as well as what they call their core range. So their collection of different beer cans is unrivaled. The front of the building would have been the administrative and editorial area, and there are still traces of that if you look beyond the restaurant tables where food is served. I guess repurposing is another word for transition. Anyway, thank you for joining me on my journey of transition, and I just wanted to say, I mentioned it in my notes, but I haven't mentioned it on the videos yet. I won't be posting my videos every week anymore because I've had a lot of work on. It's probably going to be more likely every 2 weeks. So I guess happy reading for the next fortnight.